Good afternoon and welcome to the ACNC's webinar on what the Australian charity sector looks like. I'm Kate McFarlane, a Senior Education Officer at the ACNC, and I'll be moderating today's session. Charities have a number of ongoing obligations. One is to report annually. All charities must submit an annual information statement and a financial report if they are medium or large. One reason the ACNC collects these reports and the information about charities found within them is to analyse the data and share it with the Australian community to increase understanding. Our presenter today is Dr. Andrew Young, the CEO of the Centre for Social Impact. The ACNC commissioned the Centre for Social Impact at the University of New South Wales to analyse the data reported for the 2014 year, develop various reports and develop a website to explore the data as well as other means to share the data. Hi Andrew, and thank you for joining me today.
Hi Kate, and hello to everybody out there as well.
With us today we also have Ross Gillett, a Senior Policy Officer at the ACNC, Matt Crichton and Minori Gunathalake, both Communication Officers at the ACNC. Ross, Matt and Minori will be helping to answer any questions you may have live throughout the webinar. If you'd like to ask a question, you can type it in at any time in the GoToWebinar panel, which will appear on the right-hand side of your screen. Use the chat or question box to ask a question. We will answer your questions directly and privately, but if we think the answers would be useful for everyone, we will respond to everyone. This will show the question in our reply. So let us know if you want your questions to be private. We suggest you keep your questions general rather than very specific and in a way that identifies your charity. If there are any questions we can't answer during the webinar today, which may happen if we get a lot of questions or very complex questions, we will provide answers at a later stage by email. Just a few more tips before we get started. If you have any difficulties with your sound on your computer, try calling the phone number listed in the GoToWebinar panel. You'll also have been given an access code in the email you were sent by GoToWebinar. This webinar will be uploaded on the website after the session today at acnc.gov.au/webinars. Finally, we value any suggestions you have to improve our webinars in the future, so please pass on your suggestions in the survey at the end of the session. I'll now hand you over to Andrew to begin.
Hello again everyone. This next slide introduces the pathway that we're going to go through today. The first two sections about the data set and engaging with the data are a slide or two each, and we'll just give you an overview of what's in the data that we're going to be running through and how you can access it and read various reports and interact with the data at the website. Kate will tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. The following two sections are about exploring the data, and I have two objectives in going through both the general section and the focus on finances. One is to give you an overview of what the data is telling us and what we're learning from it, and the other is to give you a sense of how you can interact with the data yourselves if you want to on the ACNC Australian Charities website that we'll tell you more about. So I'll give you a sense of what you can do there and how you can go about it. If there is time at the end among the questions, we can also have a look at a live example on the website subject to the technology supporting us. Anyway, we'll get into it. So the first two bits are about the data and an overview of the various reports and ways in which you can engage with it. The data, the information I'm going to show you today is based on reports from 38,000 charities, roughly speaking, for the 2014 year. And that might be 1st of January to 31st of December that year, or 1st of July 2014 to end of June 1 July 2013 to 30 June 2014, or various others, depending on the financial year the charity has chosen to report. So it is for the 2014 financial calendar or other year. It's based on charities' annual information statements submitted to the ACNC before the end of July last year. And a footnote to that, which we'll come back to in a second, not all charities completed their reports on time. So and in the current data set, the data I'm going to be going over with you today, there are thousands of charities that have not yet reported. The data will be updated over time. In addition, we have some links with some other data sources, which I won't elaborate on too much here, but we have some data from the Australian Business Register, the Australian Taxation Office, prior year, that is 2013 year, annual information statement data, as well as data that the charities have provided the ACNC with at the point of registration. That is data that's not updated every year, but is submitted when a charity is established with the ACNC. There are some limitations to the data, and I've introduced one example. There are 54,000 charities registered with the ACNC. Only 38,000 are in the data set that we have today. The others, as I've said, had not reported to the ACNC by July last year for various reasons. Some were just late. Some will report in bulk reporting processes. Some schools, for example, will report in a large group, and that's not yet a part of the data that we have. And there are some other reasons. So we're looking at data for 38,000 charities of the 54,000 registered Australian charities today. Within the 38,000, we also only have financial data for 28,000. There are 10,000 charities that had reported by July last year, but did not report financial information for various reasons. Nearly 7,000 of those are basic religious charities who are granted an exemption from financial reporting. Some more are going to be reporting in bulk processes that I've mentioned, and we don't have the financial detail yet. Some had no activity in the 2014 year, and so on. So, in summary, there are 54,000 registered charities, 38,000 in our data set today, and that will grow, and 28,000 for whom we have financial details. There are other limitations in the data. The biggest of those is that this is self-reported information, and there are some apparent inconsistencies in different reports. For instance, there were some we identified where they may have reported in thousands of dollars rather than in dollars, and we've done our best with the ACNC to go through a process of cleaning up that data, usually in contact with the charities concerned. Okay, we'll move on and go on and look at how you can interact with the data in a moment and the different reports and things that are available. I'll just give you a quick overview on this page of the data that we have, and I've divided it into two columns. The first column I've called dimensions, and these are the dimensions to the data that we typically use in setting up a graphic. It might be that this is the x-axis on a graph, if you like, and there'll be different examples to come. We can explore, and we've cut the data by these dimensions: sectors and subsectors, charities' main activity, their size, small, medium, large, based on income, and some more detailed breakdowns than that. Their beneficiaries, the kinds of people in the community that the charities help, their primary purpose and their location. And you'll see examples of those dimensions in the different graphics I get to in a couple of minutes' time. We also have data on, and think of this as the size of a column or the size of a circle in a graph, charities people, the staff they employ and volunteers they use, various aspects of their financial information, different categories of income and expenditure, of assets and liabilities, and some ratios that we've derived from that financial data, the age of the charity and the type of entity that they are, charity type, entity type, and whether they have deductible gift recipient status. For our international participants, that means can they issue a receipt for tax deductible purposes to a donor, that last one, DGR status. Okay. Kate's now going to take you through some of the different ways that you can read about the charity data before I go into some more detail about what we've learned from it.
Thanks, Andrew. All of the options to engage with the data that Andrew will talk through are available on our microsite at australiancharities.acnc.gov.au, and you can see the URL there up on the screen. Now, the microsite is a small website that sits alongside our main site, which is acnc.gov.au. And on the screen you can see a snapshot of that microsite homepage. And down the bottom on that homepage you can see 4 large circles. The download circle will take you to all the different reports, summaries and snapshots to download. Explore will allow you to explore the data set in detail using interactive software. You'll be able to create visualizations and take a deep dive into the data using filters to refine your search. Sector will allow you to explore the data using interactive software to take an in-depth look at Australian charities by sector. For example, you could focus on the health sector or social services. News lets you review all of the latest news items about the research and data.
The Centre for Social Impact, that's my organisation, is genuinely excited to be working on this data set with the ACNC. We share a really fundamentally important goal in analysing the data that we've received, and that is not just to provide an academic report. There is a 130-page long report you can download, as Kate has mentioned, but we're really keen, both the ACNC and CSI, to encourage interaction and use of the data, both exploration, finding out what our sector looks like and various views of it, which we'll get to in just a second, but also to really encourage people to use this information, whether it's for their own organisation strategies, for social policy, for thinking about priorities for the future, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more of that growing out of this data set over time. Okay, just in summary, the reports that you can download include, as I've mentioned, the Australian Charities Report 2014. The full version is about 130 pages. It's on the download page on the microsite that Kate's just introduced. There is a 2-page snapshot of the charity sector with some key infographics on it, and there's a 10 or 12-page summary which goes into slightly more detail. There are also sub-reports, one available now and a couple of others coming soon, one on the disability subsector, the international sector, and one about red tape, which will appear over the coming couple of months or so. Finally, there are going to be 12-page sector reports for each of the 10 or 11 sectors in the data. You'll see what they are in a minute, but for sectors like health and education and research, those 12-page sector summaries will look pretty much like the 12-page summary for the whole charity sector that is already there, but cut by subsector. So that'll be a good way to get a sense and overview of each of the subsectors fairly quickly. Okay, for the next half an hour or a bit less, I'm going to take you through some different views of the data, almost all of which you can interact with yourself. If you go to the Explore section of the website and click on the relevant link there, you can play with the data that I'm going to show you. And you can do that using a number of filters that are built into the screens you will see there. An example is on the right-hand side of this page. On the microsite, you can unclick all and click on one or more of the sectors, say health, and the data, the visuals that are on that page will update according to your selection, and you can explore by charity size, by state, by main activity, and more. And I'll show you some different examples of that on the way through the next half an hour or so. So after this presentation, if you haven't already, I'm really keen that you get on and start to explore something that might be of particular interest to you, and I hope that you'll find it useful. Just a footnote here. If there is an aspect, if there's a dimension that you would have liked to have been able to explore on the microsite but you couldn't, by all means provide some feedback. There's some links to that on the microsite as well, and we might address that in one of a number of ways. One will be in future versions of the microsite to provide that view if it's of interest to enough people. Other ways might be to do some separate work and come up with an answer to your question. We'll see how we go. So just to summarise, these are the different dimensions we're going to explore the data through in a moment, and you can customise your own views of the graphs that you'll see in the coming pages using any combination of these things if you wish. I have an overall key message. What did we learn from the data? If that's the question, the answer is it's a very diverse sector. On this page we have some examples of charities' purpose statements submitted through their annual information statement report, and there's a huge variety of purposes, of beneficiaries, of geographic focuses and others in the charity sector. You'll see some different dimensions to the diversity of the sector in the next couple of pages, but to call it one sector in some ways is a misnomer. They're in 10 or 11 different industries, different sectors if you like, and the difference between a local charity that employs no staff, has a turnover of less than $50,000 and one that has a turnover of $800 million and is a national operator of a variety of social services is chalk and cheese, and there is everything in between. Here is an illustration which you can produce in the data cube on the microsite of the number of charities and their total income. And we've created for this purpose and for many of the following pages 6 size segments which we're going to use repeatedly, and I'll just explain those here. They range from extra small or XS, that is income in the 2014 year of less than $50,000, up to extra large, which is a total income in that year of over $100 million, and the different steps are illustrated in the middle of this page. And on this page we've got the number of charities to the left, so there are only 130 charities in the data that we have, the 38,000 altogether, who turned over more than $100 million in the 2014 year. They accounted for more than half of the total income that was reported in our 38,000 charities for that year. The next year is 1,200, and if we move down towards the bottom, there are 9,031 charities in the extra small category who between them had 0.2% of the total sector income in that year. There are also 9,795 charities in our data set, as I've mentioned, who did not, for various reasons, provide a financial report for that year. Various exemptions, as I've already outlined. So that gives an overview of the variety of charity size by total income and the number of charities in each of those 6 segments. We'll use those 6 segments in some of the other analysis. I've also mentioned there are 10 or 11 sectors, and this is a summary of those. By the way, if you're on the microsite later on, I hope, and exploring the data, as you hover over each of the circles in a graphic like this one, you'll see some more information. It'll pop up in a box, and I'll give you another example of that in a couple of slides to come. So the size of the circles on this chart correlates with the amount of total income for each of the subsectors. The other number that is within each circle, for example, in education and research, the total income is about $39 billion. The following number is the number of charities in that sector, or 6,656 in the case of education and research. I say 10 or 11 sectors. There are 10 specific sectors listed here, and the labels will tell you what they are. The other unknown circle at the bottom is the 11th, and there's a variety within that. Okay, so a quick overview of the 10 or 11 sectors on this page. Most charities are in religion, which is quite a small circle, $2.7 billion, but over 10,000. The largest by income are education, research, health, social services, and development and housing. This next graphic is not that interesting on the screen in front of you. It's a picture of all of the charities in the Australian charity sector. Every circle in that picture is an individual charity, and they're too small for the labels to show. But if you hover your mouse in the online version over any of those circles, you get a little box pop up and tell you the name of the charity, a breakdown of its income and expenditure, its key activity focus, and some other bits of information. This might be slightly more interesting if we use some of the filters. So, for example, on the page where this slide and the previous one appear, you can filter it by size of charity and maybe by industry. So let's say we chose to filter by extra large, that is charities that turn over more than $100 million, and by main activity in health. And we would get this following picture. Now, on the left-hand side, there are 4 main activities within the health sector: aged care, hospital services, mental health and other health service delivery. And the circles on the left now represent the income in each of those subsectors. On the right-hand side are all of the individual charities that fit our criteria, in this case health charities that turn over more than $100 million. And you can see the names starting to appear in those circles now. Again, online, I can hover over those circles and get a pop-up box with an overview of that charity's key information appearing in the box, various income categories, expenditure, and so forth. So it gets much more useful if you're exploring online. That's true for the following graphic as well. This is a map of Australia, for those who aren't familiar with it. I guess that's fairly obvious. Every dot on this map is an individual charity. Again, online, if I hover over that dot, I'll get a pop-up box with the same sorts of information summarising that charity for you. You can also zoom in and look at a particular geography and get more detail, and you can filter it by different sectors. For example, we could look at social services in a local area using this map online. Here's an example. I've zoomed in on Sydney. I hope you're able to see some of the fingers sticking into the water near the top of the page. In the middle, that is Circular Quay. The Opera House is a little bump to the right of those. So this is a map of the Sydney CBD and innermost areas. One of the circles is highlighted next to the arrow in the middle, and the pop-up box has appeared, and that is Uniting Care New South Wales ACT. It's established in 1977. It's in the health sector. Its main focus is aged care activities and a variety, as I've said, of income and expenditure information there, total assets and total liabilities. And as I've said, you can hover over any of the dots on the screen and it'll show you the similar information. On the same page, geography, at the bottom, there's a little bit more information about the charity geography. Two graphs in particular. One is about their location and whether it's urban, inner-regional, outer-regional, remote or very remote. For the whole of the charity sector, 64% of charities are in urban areas, another 19% in inner-regional, and only a fraction are in very remote areas. That said, that fraction is fairly similar to the population based in those areas. The other graph we've got here is about the operation of the charities, whether they operate only within one state or in many states or nationally. The green segment in the pie chart is a nationally charity. There are two pie charts here. The one on the right shows those that also operate overseas. The one on the left is those that only operate within Australia, and the two together add up to the 100% of charities. A quick footnote on the urban regional pie chart. There is a limitation in the data here. That analysis is based on the head office of the charity. A national charity, for example, based in Sydney would show as urban even if 20% of its operation was in regional areas. We don't have the data to that level of detail in this data set. Another set of data is about people. And this chart summarises the total staff employed by the charity sector and the total volunteers they've reported as engaged with charities. On the left-hand side, the number of staff employed by charities of different sizes is perhaps as you might expect. That is, extra large charities employ the majority of staff and extra large charities with over 300,000 people employed by each of those segments, and it diminishes as you go down towards the very small, with only about 5,000 people employed by the 9,000 odd charities in the extra small segment. So many of those charities have no staff, no paid staff at all. A footnote on the graph on the left, this is not full-time equivalent count, so if somebody is part-time, they count as a 1 in that data. There is some other information in the annual information statement data that we have that talks about full-time equivalents for those who are interested. On the right-hand side, we have the number of volunteers that each charity reported as engaging. And this is an approximation. Charities were asked to report in bands, for example, between 51 and 100 volunteers is one data point. But we've taken the midpoint of each of those bands to calculate these overall figures, and we hope that they're reasonably accurate at this level of aggregation. Now, this is very different to staff. rather than the big charities engaging most of the volunteers, they have fewer, and volunteers are pretty well spread across charities of all sizes, much more emphasised in the middle and lower sizes compared with staff. This next graph, and I've got a couple to go before we look at finances in a bit more detail. This next graph looks at the age of the charity, and that is based on the year of registration of the charities in the data set. A couple of things I'll just note about this one. The colours here again represent the sector, like social services, health, education and research and so forth, and you can again filter and look at different sizes and different things in this graph, like with all of the other examples. There's a huge peak in 1977, and if you were a live audience, I would now ask if anybody was paying attention and could tell me why that was. Some of you might know. The answer is that in 1977 the Uniting Church in Australia was established, and it was through a merger of 3 different churches, and hundreds of charities were established with a new name in that year. That's an example of 2 things. I'd like to know, for example, what happened in 2000. This is an interesting graph to see why there might be peaks and troughs at different times. But the other example in 1977 is that this graph can be a little misleading. Many of those charities that were established in 1977 under the Uniting Church name already existed and were reincorporated as a different entity in that year. So it doesn't necessarily reflect growth in the total number of charities. Well, to put that a different way, this is based on charities that were still registered and reporting in 2014. It doesn't have data in it. We don't have the data for all the charities that were deregistered and ceased to exist over that period of time. So while this graph might make it look like there are a lot more charities being registered in the last couple of decades than there were previously, that may not be true. There may be just as many being disestablished in any given year. So again, just to summarise, this is about charities that still existed in 2014 and when they were established. By the way, if you know what happened in 2000 for that peak, I'd love to know. If you figure it out, maybe send me an email or through the website. Okay, final page in terms of non-financial information for now. This is a question about whether charities have deductible gift recipient status, whether they can issue a tax-deductible receipt. And there's a fairly neat spread from left to right, if you like, with very small charities, only about 35% of those, the second pie chart, have been DGR status, through to 90% of extra large charities, and only 22% of those not submitting a financial report have DGR status. There are similar charts for charity type and entity type, the kinds of organisations by incorporation, non-incorporated and so forth available on the website. I haven't provided all of those here, but there are some summaries below. Larger charities are more likely to be companies or incorporated associations. Smaller charities more likely to be unincorporated associations. And again, if you're interested in that kind of data, you can explore it in much more detail on the microsite and in the reports we've provided. Okay, quick breath now, I have a glass of water. But for the next few slides, we're going to explore the financial data in a little bit more detail, and Kate's going to give an introduction to that.
Thanks, Andrew. We've had a lot of interest and questions about charities' financial information, as 2014 was the first year that the ACNC collected financial information from charities. It's important to remember that we cannot understand a charity by only looking at its financial information. As mentioned by Andrew, this research has highlighted the diversity of the sector. All of these differences affect how much money a charity spends and what it spends its money on. For example, a remote health charity employing a range of medical professionals and offering services such as dialysis will have costs that are far greater than a charity based in the centre of Perth raising funds for a local childcare centre. When looking at a charity's financial information, always consider potential factors that may affect that information and how you interpret it. If possible, look for other sources of information, including contacting the charity to ask questions. You can read more about understanding financial information at acnc.gov.au/understanding financial info. There has been a lot of discussion about charity impact and administration costs. At the bottom of the Understanding Financial Information page, there are links to fact sheets on charities and administration costs, as well as understanding charity impact. Also, we have developed a fact sheet on money myths to separate the facts from the myths when operating as a not-for-profit. It covers such facts as charity can make a surplus, a charity can invest, and looks at administration costs. You can access this at acnc.gov.au/money myths.
Okay. I'm going to go on and give an overview of the financial data and just an intro to this as we get into it. This is the first time in Australia that we've had a fairly comprehensive picture of the income and expenses, assets and liabilities of charities. There have been previous reports that have explored these things, but they've been based on subsets of the data and extrapolated, things like the Productivity Commission work, for those familiar with that, back in 2010. So this is now the most comprehensive picture of charity finances that we've ever had in this country. As an overview, the total income of the sector that is included in our records is $103 billion, and there's a breakdown on this slide of the key sources of that income. Now, $103 billion is an underestimate for two reasons. One, as I've mentioned, we only have 38,000 records of the 54,000 in the data set, and within the 38,000, only 27,000 and some have provided this financial breakdown. So it is an underestimate. That said, it would still be the majority of the charity income because most of the charities that have not reported for various reasons their financial information are smaller. But this figure will increase as the data set is completed, and there should be an update to that sometime during the month of February. Now, the breakdown may surprise some of you, and it may not surprise others. I think that in my experience in the community, there's an understanding that a lot of charity income comes from donations and bequests, and actually that's only about 6 or 7% of the total income. Another 41% is from grants from government, but the majority is other income, most of which I think would be various forms of trading revenue, fees for services provided by the charity or income from products sold, whether it's through a social business or more central in the line of that charity's work. It also includes other income like interest income and some other sources. That is an area, other income, that I'd like to explore in some more detail, but it is more than half of the total charity sector income. Again, in the microsite and in the data cube part of the microsite, you can explore charity income in slightly more detail. This page has income sources by the size of the charity, from extra small to XXL, the same segments that we've been talking about before. Two things to point out on this page. The proportion of income that comes from government is much larger in larger charities, on average of course, around 44% in the XXL category, down to 7% in the extra small charities. And the proportion that is from donations and bequests is the opposite. It's about a third in small charities and only 2% in our XXL charities. So there's, again, a reasonable continuum from very small to very large in that split between donations and government income. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about this page is that it doesn't matter what size the charity, on average about half the income, or between 49 and 61%, comes from other sources. So that's fairly consistent across all of the different size charities that we're looking at here. And again, I'd like to understand that in more detail, whether the other income is consistent between fees for services and other sorts of revenue in different sizes, or looks quite different. So that'll be one of the items for further research in the future. As we've already touched on much earlier in the presentation, the total income in the sector is very concentrated in a small number of charities. So about 130 of them turn over $100 million, and they account for over half of the sector income. The largest 1% account for 58% of the sector income. It's not a Pareto rule, which is typically 80-20. In fact, 80% of the sector's income comes from just 5% of the charities, and so on, as you can see down the page. About half of all charities had income below $146,000 per annum. where did it come from? Well, 64% had no income from government. Generally, as I've suggested, the smaller charities have less or no income from government. And government grants constitute a larger part in bigger charities and in certain sectors, and you can explore that again in more detail on the website. Also in the smaller jurisdictions, the Northern Territory and Tasmania reported a higher percentage of government grants in their income. 1 in 4 charities depended on donations for more than half of their income. The minority are in that bucket. Again, mostly smaller charities and newer charities are in that category. And in a couple of sectors that was also more emphasised, international and religious activities in particular. So again, this is all part of a picture of great diversity in the sector by charity size, by location and by sector. You can see great diversity in the sources of their income as well. Most income, as I've already touched on, is not from grants or donations. A little over half of the total sector income was from other sources. There's a list of some of those sources on your screen. That was particularly important in grant makers like trusts and foundations, and in tertiary education, housing, recreation and social clubs as subsectors, and less important in some other sectors, again, listed on your screen. And you can go back and explore how the graphs I've shown you will change in your own sector or your sector of interest using the microsite. Now I'll have a quick look at expenses, and the categories that were asked in the annual information statement were employee expenses, grants made to other people or organisations, and other expenditure. The total of all expenses reported was about $95 billion. We'll come back to that in a moment, of which just over half was employee expenses. Again, a great deal of diversity depending on the size of the charity and their sector as to how the money is used, so these are overall averages. Now, the total income reported was $103 billion, the total expenditure about $95 billion. The difference is about $8 billion, which we might call marginal or net income divided by total income. Now, this is another element in the data that I think is pointing towards some more research. That is probably a larger amount, certainly, than I expected to see in the data. On average, charities are retaining, we think, about 8% of their total income based on the data that we have. And that's relatively consistent across the 6 different segments that we looked at, small, extra small through to XXL, except in the extra small and to some extent the small category. So medium, large and up all retain around about 8% or so of their total income, but the extra small charities are losing 14 or 15% of their total income a year. Yeah, that I think is a really interesting dimension to the data, and I'd like to explore that, as I've suggested, in some more detail. Now, we've only got 1 year of this kind of data available to us, and I think that looking at changes, particularly in things like this one, over time will add a great deal of information. So I'm looking forward to seeing the next couple of years' data as it comes to hand. On the following page, I've done a different split on that question of net income divided by total income. And this is, I think, the only graph I'm showing you that you can't reproduce yet on the microsite. This is a different analysis of the same data. All of the others you can play with. So here I've cut that net income percentage by sector. Remember, it was on average it was 80% across the charity sector, but it varies from 3 or 4% in social services up to over 30%, around 36% in the philanthropy sector. And I thought that was a very interesting variation, and I think this is one that really does warrant some further investigation. I can't really give you a good rationale, except maybe for philanthropy, as to why this graph looks like this. I guess in philanthropy there are lots of foundations building a corpus and not seeking to distribute all of their income. Again, a topic for further research, but the variation in the other sectors, I think, is a really interesting question. Okay, just to sum up, this is in my view, and not just from an academic research perspective, I'm a former charity CEO and interested in social policy and various other fields. I think this is immensely valuable data. It is already, but it will be even more valuable over time. For instance, how does that net income vary as we go through more positive and more difficult economic times? How does it vary as governments are going through phases of cost reduction versus a more expansive time? All sorts of things will show in time series that will pose further questions and inform us in different ways. I think that there are a great deal of research questions, of practice questions that are opened up by this data. I think this is just the beginning. So I think it's both hugely valuable today, but will grow in value over time, both as we get time series data and as further research is conducted based on what we can see now. I really do hope, and we're already seeing it, that people find it useful and will want to interact with it and cut it by their state, their sector and so forth, have a closer look. And we've had a lot of feedback about how different people in different charities and around charities are already looking at it in that way. And as I've already said too, if you have any feedback about what you're seeing, ideas for next year, ideas for different cuts to the data, things you'd like to explore but can't yet, by all means, shoot us an email through the website. There's a feedback form there, and we'll do our best to respond to you. Okay, I'm going to hand back over to Kate now, who'll take us through the last couple of pages and maybe have a look at some questions from you guys.
Thanks, Andrew, and thank you for the introduction on what is an amazing resource. Now, when we're looking at the age of charities, you put it out there as to what happened in 2000, and we've had a few people text in that they think it was the introduction of GST.
The introduction of GST? I hadn't thought about that. Why would that result in a lot more charities being established, I wonder? So if the person that, or the people that responded with that have an idea about why that would drive new charities, I'd love to hear it. Another one that I've touched on in my head is the Y2K effect. Well, not the IT issue. But I wonder if some of those charities were established because it was the year 2000. There were a couple of millennium funds and things floating around. I wonder if there are others like that. But there would have to be several hundred to create that spike, not just a few tens, and that's where I'm struggling. I don't think there were that many that looked like that. So, yeah, GST, how would that create more charities? If you know of an example, I'd love to hear it.
Great. And we've had a couple of other questions come up. Are the different sectors standardised for purposes of international comparison, so other charity regulators can use them to compare?
The sector breakdown, the main activity breakdown, are based on something called the ICNPO, the International Classification of Non-Profit Organisations. So it's ICNPO. So it is an international set of categories that have been used. That said, it has been tailored slightly for the Australian context. And I would add it's still a very difficult classification of charities to use. Charities tend not to fall neatly into one box. And that is, I think, what creates the difficulty. So, for example, the Uniting Care charity that I gave as an example when we were looking at the map of Sydney, I also happen to be a director of, so I know it reasonably well. And yes, it provides aged care services, but that's only 60 or 70% of what it does. It also has a huge range of early childhood and family services, of out-of-home care services and others. So classifying it in one sector, aged care, it's not right. And even a smaller charity can be a bit like that. It can be involved in youth and homelessness and employment all in one program. So classifying charities is an ongoing challenge. That said, what we started with, what the ACNC started with, is an international classification that is used in many countries.
Thank you. And we've had more information on the GST.
Yeah,
apparently, GST meant they needed to register.
Oh, I see. So there were some charities that pre-existed that weren't registered but had to register for the purposes of claiming back GST. Good point. I think that is the best explanation I've heard. I will look at that in more detail, but thank you.
And in the presentation, you mentioned the website data.gov.au. How's that differ with the microsite?
Data.gov.au, not just for ACNC data, but for a wide range of government data, is a place where you can download huge spreadsheet CSV files of data sets, including this one. It's very flat, it's not very value added, and it's for those who are particularly keen to do their own detailed analysis, to download a large file and to cut it and dice it any way they choose. So you can produce the same sorts of graphs and analysis that we have on your own computer using data.gov. The Australian Charities website that we're focused on today tries to make it a step simpler for people to interact with and create the common views of the charity data and to filter it and cut it in the ways that they wish. But people can, of course, do both and play with it for a while on the Australian Charities website and then download the source data and look at their own individual question in more detail if they wish.
And will the Australian charity data for future years be added to the microsite?
In short, absolutely. And I imagine starting in the next 6 months, in 6 or 7 months from now, that'll also create some new graphs for us to look at. That is how things are changing over time that aren't there now because we need one year to look at. So I think that what we've got on the Australian Charities website will be even more interesting in a year or two from now. It'll also grow before then. I touched on this too. We'll update the data for the 2014 year as more charity reports are received, and we've got a batch due to be pushed through the system in February. So that by, I hope, the end of February, that there'll be another few thousand charities in the data set that you're looking at online. The reports won't be updated the same way. The reports will be based on the same 38,000 charities that are there now, but the live data will grow. And so when you look online at the microsite in the data cube bit, that'll be the most current data that's available.
Okay, and you mentioned you're looking for a lot of feedback, so I imagine the site will change based on what people...
Yeah, as people make suggestions, we'll particularly if they're common ideas, we'll update the graphs so that they're as useful as we can make them.
Okay, now we've got a bit of time, so we might try crossing to the live microsite.
Okay, so this is, it might look like you've already seen this page, but you haven't. This is now on the live website, and this is the landing page. I'll just go back, show you how we got there. So we started with a picture of the home page, and if you want to look at the reports, that's the download section. But I'm going to click on Explore and take you through to explore all charities. The other option is to explore sector detail. Depending how we go in the next 11 minutes, we could have a quick look at both. They're very similar. They just start with a slightly different view, which I'll explain in a second. So I'm going to explore all charities, and you land on this page. The total number of charities in the data set is there. The total income is 102 billion here. There's a footnote to explain that the 102 billion in this data is slightly different to the 103 billion that I've just reported. The reason is there are 586 from memory charities who have permission from the ACNC for their data to be withheld for different reasons. So those 586 charities are not in this data set. And the reason for that is on some of the pages you can drill down to an individual charity, for example on the map as I've shown you, so they're excluded. Okay, so this is an overview. Here are all of the filters on this page on the right hand side. So if I wanted to look at, for example, I'm going to pick a larger state, New South Wales as one example. We could look at WA or any of the others. I'll do that slightly more slowly in the next one. I'm going to untick all and then choose, let's say, education and research and social services, for example. And I won't pick those two, but now my graphs here have updated to reflect charities within New South Wales in those two sectors, education, research and social services. The data down the bottom of this page, the total number of charities and their total income has updated accordingly. And I can go in and choose main activities. This list that I'm showing you at the moment is a reasonably short list. The main activities that are selected here are in those two sectors, education, research and social services. The full list would be showing if I hadn't selected those sectors, and there are 34 main activities in total that would be showing. Okay, now the changes that I've just made using those filters only apply to this page. If I want to look at those same filters on other pages, it depends on the page, I have to redo it when I use this version of the site. Here's an example of the hover over boxes. That's Monash University. This is one of the things I touched on the way through. It gives you a quick overview here. I'll give you a couple of other quick examples. you'll recognise, I think, all of the graphs now. This page is about income and expenditure. There's average total income by size at the top through to net income divided by total income at the bottom, and this graph is one of the ones I used in the presentation. So similar filters on the right-hand side. I'm just going to go back to Explore Sector Detail, this one here. Now, the pages that you're going to get when you explore sector detail are the same graphs, the same pages you've had before. The difference here is I can make some selections on this home page that apply to all of the pages, so I don't have to do it 8 times as I go through the different tabs across the top. So here I can untick all and choose New South Wales, same as I did before. I can untick all sectors and choose, what I do, health, was it? I can't remember now. And social, no, it might have been education and social services. Doesn't really matter. I'll do that one. I'll untick health and choose education research. Okay. Now those selections in the Explore Sector Detail version will apply to all of the pages, and I can just go through and look at the results without having to redo my filters on every page here. I've still got some other filters if I want to use them. At the top here it's showing me that I've got a subset of the data showing, so I don't forget. It's not the whole sector, and I can't get the whole sector unless I go back to the selection page and tick all again in those selections. The other thing that I have here that is not in the whole sector data is the ability to select by beneficiaries. And I might just explain that very quickly. If I want to know what charities help, let's say, older people, this is the way to do it. Older people and/or, let's have a look, people with disabilities, something like that. Again, the data will update as I'm doing those things. So 303 charities help elderly people who have and people with disabilities, what I'm trying to say, and there's the other information. Again, these selections now apply to the whole workbook, that is all of the tabs across the page. A final nuance, I can do charities that help elderly people and people with disabilities, or I can do charities that help older people or people with disabilities, and that's different. And so if a charity helps only elderly, they're now included, or if they help only people with disabilities, they're now included because I've got an or in my top box selection here. So you can do it either way. The way I had it before, the charity needs to select both of those groups to be included. Boolean logic for those who are familiar with that term. Okay, and at the bottom of these pages you can also do some downloads. You download the full report just here. You can also download the pictures and the summary of the data from the selection I've made on this page. You click download and a couple more steps from there.
And you can print from that download?
Yes, you can print the PDF from that download, or you can print the, you can also print, press cancel, you can also print using a web browser from this page, but it's probably better to do a PDF. It'll be a neater version.
And while we're here, we've just had a question about the sub-sectors within each sector. So say if someone is interested in just culture within the culture and recreation, can they just look at culture?
They can, but it's a two-step process. So on the screen now I've selected the culture and recreation sector on this page, and I'll go back to all in state, and I might undo these so they're not limited to people with disabilities and the elderly. Okay, so in the culture and recreation sector I'm showing 2,102 charities now. On the next page, which happens to be geography or any of the others, I should be able to choose a main activity, and the choices are culture and arts, other recreation, social clubs and sports. So I'm going to untick all and click on culture and the arts, but I'll have to do that on each page. I want to look at it here.
Yeah.
And then I can, just an example of a hover over, I'm going to pick it up tight, and it's not catching up. I've clicked on that one, and that's the Library Council New South Wales. Okay, so that's how you would do it. And you can do that for any of the sectors. Choose the sector first and then the main activity to get more detail if that's your field of interest.
Great, thank you. We might cross back to the presentation now.
Might be down here. Yeah.
There we are. So we've covered a lot today and suggested a number of pages on our website. I've included the main pages there up on the screen. So we've got the microsite, which is australiancharities.acnc.gov.au, and that's got everything we went through today on it. We also have acnc.gov.au/understanding financial info, and that contains a lot of helpful information about factors to consider when looking at the financial information of charities. And at the bottom of this page there are also links to fact sheets on charities and administration costs, as well as understanding charity impact. acnc.gov.au/money myths it looks at the common myths about what charities can and can't do with their money and separates the facts from the myths. It looks at administration costs, investing, making a surplus, and undertaking commercial activities. acnc.gov.au/find a charity or find charity links directly to our charity register where you can search for charities. And then there's data.gov.au, which is the government website where you can access government public data sets. Search for ACNC and all of our data sets will come up. You can contact us through our advice line on 13 ACNC between 9 AM and 6 PM Australian Eastern Summer Time, Monday to Friday, or by email at advice@acnc.gov.au. Email is useful if you have a more complex